All right, it's all you, Amy.
Oh, I'm not tying tonight. We've got
You
two
usually do your
tires tonight.
intros. Yep.
Oh, I gotta do all the official things. Hello, happy
Yeah.
Monday. Anyway, hope everybody had a chance to get out and fish or watch fishing videos or tie flies or whatever this weekend. Tonight we've got John in Omaha. He's going to, we got to throw him a bone every once in a while. So he'll be tying up a tenkara fly, and then also Jim will be tying too. And John had sent me the information. I neglected to send it all out to you as far as the materials, but I will. And then Jim replied all and dropped his material list in there too. So gentlemen, you guys can flip a coin and figure out who's first, but thank you both. Appreciate it.
What do you think, John? You or me? Doesn't matter to me. I can't hear you.
All right, Jim, you're up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was gonna say there.
There,
you go.
how about now? Can you hear me now? It helps if I unmute the mic.
Yeah. So do you want me to start?
Yeah, go ahead. And then, because I've only got one, and you can take as long as you need, and I can just do mine as fast as I can if I have to. So,
Okay. Well, I'm going to do mine pretty quickly too. So anyway, I'm going to tie a soft tackle. John's going to tie a tenkara fly, and honestly, a tenkara fly could very well be considered a type of soft tackle. Really, the biggest difference between a tenkara fly and a soft tackle is the collar and the way it's tied in. Basically, you can use the same hooks, you can use the same materials, the same types of hackle, and what have you. And the difference being a tenkara fly is that collar is tied so it is pointing up and away from the hook bend, and a soft hackle fly is tied so that the collar is pointing down. So tonight I'm going to tie a partridge and pheasant tail. In most of your soft hackle flies, they don't have elaborate names. It's usually just whatever they're tied of. I tie orange and partridge, olive and partridge, yellow and partridge, purple and starling. And when I just say a color, that means it's a thread body. And traditionally they would have been tied with a silk floss, but the thread works just fine. And then for natural materials, I do pheasant tails and peacock herl flies. And this pheasant tail is probably the one that I fish the most. And I'm not going to try to tell you that it catches more fish, but I just somehow I love the look of the pheasant tail and the peacock thorax and stuff. So it's my own aesthetics rather than the ability to catch fish. So as far as materials to tie these things, I was almost reluctant to even post the materials because you can use such a huge array of materials to tie these things with. As far as the collar goes, the hackle goes. I use most of the time, I'll use Hungarian partridge, and that's used quite often, but you can use grouse, you can use starling, you can use hen, India henback. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. You're just looking for a feather that the fibers are very soft, so they bend very easily. And they don't have, I'm not sure what you would call it, but you know how you have a feather that sticks together and you try to pull the things apart and they want to stay together, you get it apart, you put it together and they're stuck. It's like Velcro. So you don't want that. So you can use all kinds of different feathers for the collar. Hooks, I use nymph hooks. I know people who will only use dry fly hooks. I know people who will use like natural bend hooks, like similar to what you would use if you were tying a stimulator or something like that, that curved hook, only certainly much smaller and stuff like that. So there's all kinds of hooks that you can use. Body material, you can use floss, you can use thread, you can use, I'm like I say, I'm using pheasant tail, and I'm going to be and I use peacock herl and stuff like that. So there is just, it's almost unlimited to what you can do. So let me get to the other camera. So this is what we're tying tonight. This is, let me change the light here. So it's as simple as this. We got pheasant tail, we got a copper wire rib, we got a peacock herl thorax, and we got a partridge collar. So I tie all my flies in 3 different sizes. And like I say, I use nymph hooks. So I'm going to start out, this is the largest size that I tie. And this is a number 14 UL103 from Umpqua. And this is a 2 extra long hook. So if I'm using 2 extra long hooks, I'm tying them in 14s, 16s, and 18s. If I'm using a 1 extra long hook, I'm tying them in 12s, 14s, and 16s. I'm not concerned about the gape. I'm concerned about how long the hook is. So I tie them with the straight part of the shank is about a 1/2 inch, and the medium size is probably about 3/8, and the small is about 1/4 inch. And then as far as the thread, I'm going to be using Unithread 8/0 and orange. And, if you are going to use the Ultra Thread, I would use 70 denier rather than the 140 for the body. Of course, I'm using pheasant tail. For the rib, I am using copper ultra wire, size small. For the thorax, I'm using peacock herl. And for the collar, I am using partridge. Now this, believe it or not, this is actually a partridge pelt. And it just kind of looks like a big thing of fuzz to you, because I've had this thing for 20 years, and I think I can probably safely claim to have pulled somewhere between 400 and 500 feathers off of this thing. So one of these will last you a lifetime, but back when I bought this a long time ago, it was like $22, but then they went up to $80, but I think the prices have come down a little bit. So if you just want to tie a few dozen to see if they catch fish for you, you can actually buy the Hungarian partridge in packets of loose feathers, and you'll open it up and there'll be big feathers and there'll be small feathers, and 1/2, 3/4 of them you won't be able to use. They won't make good flies, but you pick through it and you pick out the ones that you can use, and I'm sure you'll get 2-3 dozen flies out of that. So if you don't want to, buck up for a full pelt, that's a good way to go. So I'm going to start by getting the thread on the hook. And then I am going to tie on the copper wire. Come on, here we go. I'm going to take this right down to the bend of the hook. Then I'm going to bring the thread back to about 1/8 of an inch behind the eye. And I'm going to put on my cheaters here so I can see what I'm doing. And then I'm going to take some fibers off of my pheasant tail. Now, I'll probably take maybe a half a dozen. These fibers right here are pretty close to about 2 inches. So half a dozen will probably do it. If it was shorter, I might take 8 or 10 or 12 or whatever. Certainly the more you have, the more area that you can cover. So it can be shorter, you can still cover the same amount of hook. So used to be, I would tie this in on the bottom, wrap it forward, and then counter wrap the wire. But I've since learned that it's a lot easier to tie this in the front and wind the feather back and then wind the wire forward. And the beauty of doing that is if you're bringing them both from the back to the front, you need to counter wire one of them. So you wind one in one direction, you wind the other in the other direction, because you want the wire to be overlapping and protecting the pheasant tail fibers. But whichever one that you wind backwards, when you come time to tie it down, then it's going in the opposite direction of where you're winding your thread. So as you tighten up your thread, it's going to loosen something. So this overcomes that. So I'm going to wind these back. And I like to have my fibers long enough that I can wind them with my hands rather than hackle pliers, because I just have better control over them and I can lay them out flat. If I use hackle pliers somewhere along the line, I'll do something like I just did. I'll lose a fiber, or they just don't end up, one seems to be longer. I have problems with it. So if I can do it with my fingers, I'm much better off doing that. Okay, now I'm going to take my wire. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap it right around the back of the hook, all the way around one time. And that's going to capture that end of the pheasant tail fibers. Then I'm going to wind towards the front in a spiral. 4 or 5 wraps will get me up to the front. And now I'm going to go ahead and tie that end off. I'll take the wire and I helicopter it off. I just kind of wind it around till it breaks. And that helps. If you're cutting it, you always end up with some little part that's sticking out somewhere. And then I'm going to cut off the excess fibers in the back. And if you look, it kind of looks like I'm crowding my hook here. And for many flies, that would be crowding my hook. But for these flies, I'm really not, for 2 reasons. When I tie on the thorax, which I'm going to do next, whoops, and I just use a single, whatever sort of peacock curl. First thing I do is down the bottom, the first probably 2.5 to 3 inches is very brittle. So I just cut that off. I don't use that. You tie that on, you start wrapping it, and more times than not, it's going to break. But anyway, as I tie this thorax on, I'm going to tie it over that end of the body right there. So I'm tying it on top of the pheasant tail. That makes it just, a little thicker. There's no magic number to how many wraps. It's just whatever looks good to you. And that looks pretty good right there. I'm going to tie that off. And now I'm going to tie the partridge in, the partridge feather in. And again, I'm not crowding the hook because this is not a dry fly where I'm going to make 10, 8, 10, 12 wraps around there to get a thick collar. According to Sylvester Neames, who is my guru for soft hackles, who kind of brought soft hackles back to the forefront about maybe 20, 30 years ago. He recommends somewhere between 1.5 and 2 wraps on the collars. He does them very sparsely. And I've tied them thick, and you can tie them thick. There's nothing wrong with that. But yeah, I kind of go with his recommendation. I try to keep them relatively sparse. So here's a feather off of the off that pelt. We're going to prepare it, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get rid of all of this fluff. Pull it right off. Cut that big piece off right there. Now, the next thing I do, kind of when I'm picking out a feather for my fly, I'm usually looking for one that the fibers are about as long as the hook, or maybe a little bit shorter. So when I had a full pelt, I would go through and I'd find the right size fly, but now I pull off whatever I got left. So you can see this is a little bit long. So I'm going to start stripping some of these off, because the further you get up the stem, the shorter they're going to be. So you can see what I'm doing. I'm pulling that off, and now I'm going to, that's quite a bit off of there. And that's still a little bit long, but that's probably about all I'm going to be able to take off and still have a full collar on here. Now there's 3 ways that you can put this collar on, and this is probably the most complicated part of tying the fly, is getting this collar on. There's 3 ways to tie it on. You can tie it on by its tip, you can tie it on by its butt, and you can actually strip off one side of the feather and just tie it on that way. Obviously, if you stripped off one side of the feather, you're going to need a little bit more than what I have right now. But I think traditionally they tie it on with the tip, but I tie it on with the butt, and I tie almost all my feathers on by the butt, because I just feel that when I tie it on by the butt, that those fibers will just lay out. I feel like I have better control over it. They'll lay out more easily. If I tie it in by the tip, I always feel like they're fighting me. So I can do it that way, but it's just my preference. So, and it's kind of one of those things, you just need to find your personal preference. If you've never tied these things before, when you first start tying them, you're going to have problems. And hopefully we're not going to see some of these problems tonight, but it's a very fragile feather. You can't pull it too tight. Trying to get the fibers to go in the right direction and stuff like that, it can really fight you until you get the technique down. Once you get the technique down, it's pretty easy. But so I have my hackle pliers on the end of the stem here. Then I'm going to pull these barbs out, and I want to try to get about 1/4 inch of barbs sticking straight out. So that's pretty good right there, if you can see that. From here to here is somewhere between 3/16 to 1/4 of an inch. I'm sure if I counted the barbs, it'd be somewhere between maybe 12 and 15 fibers there. And the reason that I picked that length is that will usually give me right between 1 to 1.5 wraps. So I'm going to tie in by the butt section. Cut off the excess stem here. And most of the time when I'm tying, I'll have my scissors in my hand, dangling from my thumb here. I find it's easier than having to put them down and pick them up multiple times while I'm tying a fly. But when I'm putting on one of these feathers, I'm putting my scissors down because this, like I say, if you're going to run into problems, this is where it's going to be. So you lift the feather up and you want to get it so that the feathers are trying to sit perpendicular to the hook rather than up or down. Sometimes it works a little bit better than others. This one's a little off kilter, but I can live with it. And then, so you're lifting it up. Do not pull too hard. You will break it in an instant. I'm going to start brushing these fibers back. So I'll stroke them back 3 or 4 times just to convince them that's where they want to go. And after a few times, I'm going to brush them back and I'm going to hold them. So you can see I'm holding those fibers. Now I'm going to start the wrap. So I'm going around, get down to the bottom. I'm going to have to let those go. They're going to come back on the other side. I'm going to pull them back again. Then I'm going around a second time. Okay, I'm at about 1.5. And I got a little bit more to go. So there we go, 2 wraps, pretty much perfect. Now I am going to tie that off. I'm going to cut off the excess. If I had done it right, I wouldn't have had any fibers going out forward, but again, I can live with that. That's not a problem. So certainly what we want to do now is we want to pull all of those fibers back and then make a small head. I've got one more errant fiber over there. And I got one little thing sticking up here. Okay, so you want a head really just big enough to kind of press on the fibers and convince them that they want to go back rather than forward. And then I'm going to take my whip finish tool and do a whip finish. Cut the thread, and you're going to notice when I cut the thread, and I do this with all my flies, I'm not going to put my scissors in there and try to cut the thread. I'm just going to use the scissors like a knife, because every time I put the point of my scissors in to cut my thread, I end up cutting all these fibers off. So that is it. Like I say, this is probably the most complicated soft hackle that I tie, and you can see it's very simple.
Hey, Jim,
Yes, sir.
would you put like a couple pheasant bars back on as a tail?
You can do that. Yeah, I've seen patterns where they have tails, and again, it's just like any fly. You can use little bits of pheasant tail off the back or hackle or whatever. I've seen patterns with soft hackles with tails on. I would say the majority don't, but absolutely, you can really do anything you want.
Okay.
So I think I covered everything that I wanted to cover there. And
And Jim,
yes, sir.
will you explain why you put the peacock herl collar in there?
Mostly because I like that combination. So again, these flies, you can tie them with a thorax or not with a thorax, with a rib or not with a rib. That's like I say, I think it's my own aesthetics rather than what the fish are looking for. So, I mean, for instance, here is what you call a partridge in orange. Let me get a darker background here. Partridge in orange. That body is just an orange thread and the collar is partridge. It's got no rib. It's got no thorax. I mean, it just doesn't get any simpler than this. If you want to tie a super simple fly, and it may be just as effective as the fly that I tied, thread body and a collar, and that is all you need. So yeah, like I say, the thorax is just, you see patterns with them, see patterns without them. Just something about it. I like the look of it.
Yeah, and I like that thorax as well. I read something where they said if you put that in there, your hackle didn't collapse over, and it made a little more movement. But I don't fish them enough to really know.
That's what I was gonna say, Jim, is
Yeah.
that I actually think, because I was tying along with when Jim Saraceno was doing that, and I like with the peacock behind it, because just like how he did with the thread head to push those fibers back, he's doing the opposite by putting in that thorax behind it. It doesn't collapse as much, where the other ones are a little bit more on the hook shank too. I don't know.
You know,
I think it's kind of
Yeah,
open to try it.
yeah, that's a really good point, and I've never thought about that before. But when those things get wet, the first thing that hackle does is just,
Yep.
go right down to the body and stuff like that. And it doesn't really touch the body, but I just feel like this hackle almost blurs the picture of the body, and it just gives it a different image. Like I say, when it's in the water, it's not going to look anything like what it looks like on the vise.
Yeah.
But that would make perfect sense, that it would help hold that away from the rest of the body if you tied that thorax in there. And like I say, that's a great idea, and I'd never even thought of that before.
And I think especially if you're adding in like a shell on the top of that for some of the other patterns that you tie, Jim. But if you're pulling that shell up over the top too, it helps give that little extra bubble, basically.
Yeah. There you go.
So I don't know. I like it. Anything you do with peacock, I mean, it just adds that accent. Who doesn't like that color?
Yeah.
That was great.
Yeah, like I say, for some reason, I have this thing about pheasant tail and peacock. I love those materials. So love the look, love the working with them.
It's a confidence fly, definitely. And I think the action too. And yeah, I just tied when you were doing that one. I did it actually on a jig style, and I'm ready to put that to the test. So thank you. Very nice job.
Yeah.
Hey, Jim.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Hey, Jim, is there another feather for the collar that will sweep back like that besides which one it was now?
Okay, so again, I also use starling. Hen is very good for soft hackles. Like a hen cape or a hen back or whatever. Let me get one of those.
Pheasant works really well too. In fact, the fly I'm going to tie, I use a pheasant, a cock pheasant fiber or hackle to tie it on.
Yes, there you go.
A breast feather.
So I'm
No,
going to
the
show
hackle.
that
The hackle
I'm gonna-
feather.
I'm- Yep, I'm gonna show a real quick thing while Jim's getting out his stuff too. So if you have a saddle or a hackle, you know, you got the whole thing here. I've talked about this before. Turn it on the side, because this is where you're gonna find more of your thick fibers too. I think I'm correct. You guys are the experts more on the soft hackle. But when you go to separate, so I pull this off and it's got all like the marabou that Jim was talking about, you know, as far as pull off all the fluff here. But when you get down to these fibers and you pull it the other way, see how it has almost a greasy feel to it? That's anything that has that kind of a movement to it. So I can pull it up this way. Again, when I pull it down and it doesn't, it wants to separate and kind of do its own thing from each other. It gets a little bit, when you mess with some of these other feathers and you pull them down and they actually stay completely back together. I mean, just kind of play with the different feathers. You're going to figure out as far as what you like to lay back, but there's a lot of different things, especially on some of the packs you might already have. You might find feathers that work very, very well for what you're wanting to do. Save your tips of it though, for other flies. Don't try to make that work for what Jim just did or what John's going to do either. This isn't the right one, but if you go further on the exact same feather, go in here and see what it does. So a little bit almost like a Schlapplin feather.
Yeah. So yeah, like I say, I got a hen cape here. It's you know, basically, I guess you would call that furnace. It's got the black inner feather and the brown on the outside. And it's just, you can see the feather. It's very soft. But you know, the fibers do not try to stick together. So, I mean, those make great soft hackles also. As a matter of fact, most of my 10 carat flies, and I'm not even sure why, but most of my 10 carat flies, I use hen. And for most of my soft hackles, I use either partridge or starling.
Hey,
So,
Jim, I got a
Yeah.
question. Does it make a difference with the dull side or the shiny side of the feather?
Does.
yes. So,
So could you go over that, what you think?
yes. So for instance, when you're tying that feather in, that feather has a natural curve here. And you want that natural curve to be going back like this. So when you tie it in, and these feathers, they're not real shiny. It's not like this is a shiny feather on one side, not shiny on the other, but it's definitely, it's got that, you can tell it's the front and the back.
Right, right.
So I always tie in, I guess what you would call the shiny side, tie that in facing up. So as it winds around the hook, it's going to have a tendency, you see how it wants to go in that direction? So that's the way you would do it. You tie that in, what you would call the shiny side up. So as it goes around, it has a tendency to go back instead of forward. Now, John's probably going to have his be just the opposite, because you're going to want those collars to face going away from the hook and rather than towards the hook.
Thank you.
You bet.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is the feather will tell you. So it does have a natural bend to it. And I think also as far as when, you know, some of them, you actually, I mean, you need it under good light to tell which is the up, but it'll have a normal curve to it. And then you go the direction you're going. So I think on that perfect segue from Jim to John on tying in the feathers the other direction. Let's you ready to roll here, John?
Oh, yeah, let's do it. Okay.
All
Let me
right.
change cameras real quick here. Well, let me just show you what I'm going to use tonight. I'm kind of a traditional sort of person, and traditionally we tie tenkara flies with silk thread. So I'm going to be using some silk thread. Red is the fly I'm going to tie, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. And what I use is this thread right here from Silky. And it's about the size of a 6/0 thread from Unithread. So it works really, really, really well. For the, oh, where'd my, it was right here. Got blown off. I will be using peacock herl, as Jim did for the collar. And I will be using, that's it really, pheasant hackle and peacock herl. But I'm going to have to go find some more peacock because I just lost mine. Now, the traditional fly is tied with the eye of the peacock. There we go. This part right here. But I usually don't do that. I'm not too concerned about it. And the fly I'm going to tie for you tonight is called the Hakiyama Sakasa Kabari. Let me turn that off. And I can get this down a little lower. There we go. And that's it right there. Look familiar?
Yep.
If you look at that and compare it to Jim's, it's very similar to a soft hackle fly. In fact, it is a soft hackle fly. All you do is put the hackle on facing forward instead of facing backwards. Now, the name of the fly, actually, the Japanese name their flies pretty much the same way we do. Takayama is the region of Japan where this fly is popular. It's in the north central part of Japan, up in the mountains. Sakasa means forward facing, and Kabari means hook with feather and fur. So if you stop and think about it, this is a dry fly with forward facing hackle that's popular in the Takayama area of Japan, and that's it. So let's get started. Now, one thing about tenkara, as you all know, tenkara is all about simplicity. We want tenkara fishermen keep things as simple as we possibly can. And it's the same when we're tying these flies. We want the flies to be simple too. Now, let's see what I do here.
It's good.
Looks like
You're
I
good.
just lost my focus. Okay. Come on. How's that look to everybody?
Yeah, fine.
Okay. All right, so the hook I'm using is from Green Caddis Outfitters. It's this hook right here. You can't see that very well. It's a 2488 nymph hook from Green Caddis, and it's just a standard nymph hook, nothing special or anything. So just like Jim did with his fly, we're just going to start with some simple thread. Just going to put a few wraps on here. And also like his fly, I start right at the hook eye and come forward, because the thing I just put on there, that red thread, is the head of the fly. And again, almost, if you remember everything that Jim said, it all applies to this fly. Okay, so there's my pheasant hackle, and you'll notice that it's got a bend to it. Whereas Jim put his on with the bend down, so the fibers went backward. This goes on bend up because the fibers are going forward. Now, a lot of people ask, why do you have the hackle facing forward? And the reason for that is actually very straightforward. The tenkara form of fishing is conducive to having more drag on the line than Western style fishing, because in Western style fly fishing, we've got a lot of line out there that we can put drag on, and it helps us with our retrieves. In tenkara fishing, there is no real drag on the line. So the forward facing hackles actually, as you pull the fly and move the fly through the water, the hackles open up rather than collapse. So it adds a little more drag to the fly, makes it a little easier to manipulate, okay? All right, so now the first thing I'm going to do right now is I'm going to tie this hackle in. And I'm going to use a very similar procedure to what Jim did. Put a few wraps on there. I'm going to clip off that end. Wrap it over. And then come back. And now I'm going to take my thread behind the hackle. Okay. As Jim said, this is the hardest part of the tie, is the, let me see if I can change that light a little bit. Is that better? That looks a little better. Okay. So I'm going to put my clippers on here. And I'm going to hold it up. And again, be careful with these because they're very delicate. They want to break. I'm going to wrap it forward. Now, unlike with the Western style fly where the hackles are facing backwards, I want to wrap this from the front to the back, constantly stroking these feathers forward, the fibers forward. There's two. I think I can probably get one more wrap on this. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Okay. Clip this off. Okay. Now what I like to do is I like to stroke it forward and then just bring a couple of more wraps up forward to hold those fibers in place. There we go. Okay. And that's the hard part. The rest of it's very straightforward and something you've all done before. I'm just going to put on, I use 2. I've heard people say 3 fibers of the peacock curl. But like Jim, I'm going to cut off this stiff part right here. Now I'm going to wrap this in behind the hackle. Clip it off, clip off the excess. Now I like to wrap my herl around the wrapping thread. I think it gives it a little more strength. And you all know that peacock is pretty flimsy. All it takes is about 2 or 3 takes and it's pretty much shot. It's not that our warm water fish have bigger, better, or worse teeth than trout do, but they just don't seem to, they seem to tear up these flies pretty good. Okay. I'm going to take this and unravel it. That's enough of a collar. Clip that off. Sorry about that. Okay. Come forward a little bit. And then start working backwards. Now all I'm going to do is just make a thread body here. Just like a soft hackle orange or a soft hackle yellow, which I've tied lots of in my day. I used to use it on the Platte River all the time in Colorado. And those browns just seem to love, especially in the fall, a soft hackle yellow. I don't know why. Now, I normally tie this fly on a size 12, a 14, and 16. And I'm tying it on a 10 tonight, just so you can see it a little easier. And the body doesn't really have to be tapered all that much, so. Now, one of the differences, of course, is that instead of tying back to front, I'm tying front to back. So when I get ready to put my half hitch on, the half hitch goes on the back end, not the front end, which creates a little bit of a problem, but not too much. And this silk is really pretty strong. And there is the Takayama Sakasa Kabari. So it's like, as Jim said, the hardest part is getting this hackle on, the collar on. You got to be really careful with it. It'll break in a heartbeat, and it's hard to get it to go exactly where you want it. So, any questions? It's just a soft hackle fly tied backwards. Okay.
So if you want to tie it forward, this is what you end up with. So
Yep.
I tie the exact same thing, only in a soft hackle. Like
Yep.
I say, the same, basically the same materials, the same types of hooks, everything.
Yeah, like Jim, I use all different hooks on this. I've started using these scud hooks a little bit more than the others, but I've tied it on dry fly hooks, wet fly hooks, 2X long streamer hooks, just about everything. Tie it on whatever you happen to have available, because the fish don't seem to mind too much. Now, if I tie this same fly without the peacock curl on it, it's called a Sakasa Kabari. And you can tie the Sakasa Kabari, in fact, they are tied in every color under the sun. And then if you add a peacock collar to it, it's still a Kabasa Sabari, or Sabari Kabasa. The red is the one that people think of when they talk about a Takayama fly. So fun fly to fish, fun fly to tie, very productive. When I'm going out on the water with my Tenkara rod, let me change cameras here. Come on. There we go. Come on. This is gonna be trouble tonight. Okay. There. Okay. This is what I carry with me. I don't know if you can see that.
It's your
That's
tackle
just-
box.
Yeah, that's my tackle box. I carry 2 Tenkara fly lines on it. And then this little thing right here opens up. And I've got my fly box right inside there. So when I'm out on the water, this goes in my pocket. I don't have a fly vest with me. I don't have anything with me. I just have this thing. Now, I say that. I have something like that with me when I'm fishing fairly close to the car. I do carry with me when I'm going out someplace, I will carry, like Amy, I'll carry 100 and 200 flies with me. But the Japanese philosophy is a little different than ours is, and I've been trying to try it out. The Japanese philosophy is if you know there's fish in the river or the creek and you're not catching any, don't change the fly. Change the how you're presenting the fly to the fish. And it's interesting because Frank Sawyer on his bug that he tied, the Utah killer bug, his grandson wrote several articles about he and his grandfather fishing together, both using the exact same fly, and his grandfather catching all kinds of fish, and he wasn't catching any. And that was all due to the technique of the fly fishermen. So I've started doing that. If I'm not catching, I change up the way I'm presenting the fly, and that does seem to have helped a little bit. So, like I say, most Japanese fly fishermen only carry 1 or 2 flies with them when they're out. So that's it. Anybody have any questions?
Well, I'd like to add that between the soft hackles and the Tenkara flies, you don't have to use one for the Tenkara rod and the other for
Right.
the regular rod. I have fished both Tenkaras and soft hackles on my regular rods, and I've fished them both on my Tenkara rod, and I have caught fish all the way around.
Yeah, it goes back to the old saying, you use the tools that are working. So you use the tools that'll catch fish. And using a Tenkara rod in a 30-mile-an-hour wind on the lake is stupid. Pardon my expression. You're not going to go anyplace. You're going to hook your ear. I know. I've been there, done that. So you grab
We have
that old,
evidence.
yeah, you grab that 8-weight from the back of your car and go fishing. I mean, it's simple. So common sense rules.
And what I like with these flies too, I mean, if you actually start looking at it and start taking the parts of, just when we go to entomology, what they resemble. And that's the part where it's kind of interesting because I was tying along with John as well. And all of a sudden I'm looking at him like, that's an emerger.
Yeah.
So again, start looking at what the fly can be. And I think also, and part of it is the biggest part, I think, with tying these flies is that you're tying in reverse. So we're so used to starting at the bend and going forward. And I was already, not listening. I was going ahead and everything. And I'm like, wait a minute, what? And I had to back up because you start at the front and then you tie backwards, which again, it's good practice. I mean, Charlie Cravens is one who said you should tie with your non-dominant hand, right? I mean, it really is something where, just get your mind to think on this. And I also think then it creates that more attention to what you're doing. You're practicing perfect every time you're out there. So you guys both use Peacock Hurl. And what's curious with that, and I heard it referred to as swords and everything. And I actually want to only give my input because as a newer tire to the folks who've been on here, don't go in blind and ask for sword because you'll get this. Can you guys see this on here? So this is actually sword, right? Not this. Yeah, you can't do a whole lot, but it makes some really cool colors. But anyway, it is, again, when we're talking about Peacock Hurl, we're more on the longer edges of this. With the sword, I mean, it's amazing. I looked at it for hours and hours because it changes colors every time you go. It's so fascinating, but probably this inch isn't a whole lot to tie with. So you want to go in and you want to find the bigger, kind of in that part of it. They sell it in all kinds of things. Packs comes in a lot of different colors in this too. And then John referred to as far as the eye portion of it. So you can find the whole thing. And these are cool. What's great with this
Hobby
is
Lobby.
I actually find, check Hobby Lobby. And apparently there's a fly tying section in the Hobby Lobby in Ohio. By the way, just open. Who knew? So
They
if you get
take
to
all the stuff
Ohio,
from yeah, they probably take the stuff from their plant section and move it over.
I guess, but that's where I found some of the best buyouts.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
again, when you're looking at the peacock portion of it, what I like about using the eye section for me personally is I find that these are much more durable than sometimes when you buy them in the pack. These will break off like what both gentlemen talked about as far as you're tying with them, and they'll break. I found it a little bit more durable when I'm working with the eye section. And so you got some really good sections in here. They're nice and buggy. You pull them apart. They've got just a little bit more give to them, a little bit more forgiving. And like anything, if you just leave these sitting out, they're going to get a little bit more dry. So Ziploc bags is what I would also recommend. But yeah, if you go buy a sword, you won't get a whole lot to work from. You'll get all these really pretty colors. But that's all I have on that. But great job, both. That was a lot of fun and a good reminder on everything, just as far as just technique and taking your time with it, picking your materials.
Well,
Anybody
you
have any
just taught me
questions?
something. You just taught me something because I never knew. I always thought sword and hurl was pretty much interchangeable. I never knew there was a difference there.
Well, I did too. Because I did too. But yeah, so swords look like this. I think I switched over. I thought they were the same. And so, yeah, I went to go shop and this is what I was given. And they're like part of, but the one side is really, really thin. You could use it for things, but it actually is more like almost that Beavis, but they're the most amazing colors ever. Yeah, I had no idea either. Imagine my surprise.
This is the one
when
I
opened
picked
this
up
pack.
at Hobby Lobby.
Yep.
See, you don't see too much there, but they're long.
Yeah,
This is the whole pheasant, their peacock tail or feather.
Yep.
Really cool.
So, and it really is something where, yeah, imagine my surprise, but that's another lesson, Jim, because what happened is I thought, I know what I'm getting now, and I ordered them online. So you can imagine my surprise when I opened that up and went, so now what do I do with these? They do make great nymphs. And again, the colors, I can't even describe them. It's just they're so true. And really iridescent, teal, green, they're gorgeous. But they're not the same. I'm better off buying local and just getting the whole big pack of them and then figuring out which ones I like. So that's pretty cool. But they do come in a lot of different, like this one's considered orange. And the only thing, oh, I'm on the wrong camera. The only thing orange about it is the tips where they dyed it. The rest of it's still green, right? So you see in the bag, it's green, but the label is orange. So, kind of pay attention to what you're looking at. But yeah, the only part orange is right here, which you would never use. So it is kind of interesting. I've never had any luck with friends who have gifted me peacock feathers.
Yeah.
Because this is, it's great. I mean, they're cool to get, but there's just not a lot of meat to them. So, but they're really cool. But then by the time you get up here to the end, there's not a lot to work with as far as lengthwise. But again, that really cool blue-green color. Well, that's all we have for tonight. And so I got a wonderful email from Jim Saraceno today and about some different topics. So I think what I'm going to do is kind of let it run on that. He had some wonderful different ideas as far as winter care tips on, we've got a lot, we've got a ton of different ideas of different directions we can go with that. And we'll kind of talk and then send out something for next week, unless anyone has a very specific request that they would like to see for next Monday night. And then we can start all of the winter tips and all the different topics. It has so many ideas on there, and every one of them, I'm like, that's great. That's great. So thanks for the email, by the way, Jim.
You're welcome.
Does anybody have anything they want to see for next Monday night at all? Just anything just kind of burning as far as topic wise?
I
It would
want
be
to thank
helpful.
I want to thank the presenters. It was excellent, and it was very good to see the difference between both of those.
Yep,
Yeah,
very
it's
nice.
really
And
interesting, and they're
The
both very
colored
effective.
girls, I don't know if you can quite see it, but you can really get some distinct colors and some vibrant oranges and reds besides just the green.
Yeah, those are great ones, Roger. All right, anybody, any topics for next week?
How about, does anybody want to do any crawdads?
We would love to have you tie a crawdad, Carl.
I haven't tied
Will you-
any, I haven't tied any crawdads since the last time, but I've been playing with a different way that I was watching on one of Sun Dow's videos, and it was really a slick way to do it. So I'm going to practice that a little more. I'll do crawdads next week.
Next
Cool.
week, we'll do crawdads. All right, we might have to call in, if you need some help from Soon Tao, we might have to call him in. He moved to, he's in a new state again,
Where is he
South
now?
Carolina.
South
He's
Carolina.
over with Jerry Magnetti at South Carolina. So glad to have him. He's close. But yeah, love to have you do that, Carl. And then we'll talk about winter fishing and kind of get into care of our equipment and apparently cleaning our fly rooms, I guess, according to Chris. He said my room was a mess. It's not a mess. It all makes sense to me.
Hey, you know,
Hey, I got,
everybody wants me to clean up, and when I do, I never can find anything.
I got it all here, except that I still can't find that Amherst head somewhere. I don't know where it is. I'm gonna find it somewhere. But all right, well, I appreciate everybody being on. And John, I'll see you later this week. You
Yep.
go ahead and give your little plug if you want to for Thursday night.
Thursday night, 6 o'clock, we're doing our bi-weekly fly tying event. And if anybody wants to, I know I sent Amy the link, but just email me or email Amy and we'll get you a link to join us. Amy's going to be our guest fly tyer this week. She's tying jig head flies. So, and if anybody wants to learn how to build a fly rod, well, let's see, I don't know. I was exposed to COVID, so I might not be able to make it. I have a class on Wednesday night that I've been putting out on the teams, but I got waiting on my doctor to tell me whether or not I can go or not. So,
Yeah, well, if nothing else, you can watch it then from your teams because you set it up on your teams. Maybe those guys can get it going. Larry or
Yeah.
Mark should be back. Mark should be back in action by then, shouldn't he?
he should be. I'll ask Mark if he can set it up and go. So we'll see what happens.
I sat in their class last week and it was really cool to see in just the way it's set up. And it brings us to, I almost felt like I was just watching, like on TV or something. So yeah, they're doing a rod building with Nebraska Parks and Games. And yeah, it's really good. But on Thursday night, if you guys want to join, we'll talk about I've got about 4 different fly patterns. So we obviously need to narrow it down before Thursday, John, but I'll check with you and you can tell me which one we're tying.
Yeah, and Mike Swanner's our new regional coordinator is going to be there as well. So he's got a meeting with Charles and I afterwards. So it'll be fun.
Outstanding. All right. Well, everybody stay healthy and we will catch up next Monday night, same time, same bat channel. And we'll watch Carl tie crawdads.
Sounds
Good
good.
lines, everyone.
Sounds good.
Thank you,
Right.
guys.
See you, everybody.
Thanks,
Yeah.
everybody.